Fantastic. My mic's now working. Good afternoon. No, almost afternoon. Sorry, we're running a few minutes late. But for this last morning session at AusCERT 2020, we have a pre-recorded session from Leon Fouche and Mike Holm discussing the results of the joint AusCERT BDO annual survey from 2019. Mike and Leon will be in the chat to answer live questions as we go, but there won't be any live Q&A at the end of the session. So make sure you're asking questions as you go, and I will drop the, I should have already dropped the presentation into the chat, and I'll drop a link to the survey if you wish to download it yourself.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for making time to come and listen to Mike and myself. So what we're going to talk through today is basically the BDO AusCERT cybersecurity survey results. This is our 4th year that we're running the results. And what we're going to cover off in today's presentation is just really have a quick discussion about how the cyber threat landscape has changed since the last time we presented this. We will talk a bit about the 2020 Australia cybersecurity strategy, and then look at the results from our survey and see how prepared are we to support, or how the strategy itself can actually support Australian organisations from a preparedness perspective. So for those that actually attended last year, I mean, I did talk about the World Economic Forum Global Risk Landscape. So this report was released pre-COVID, and what came out of last year, which is really the results from a survey and the work that World Economic Forum was doing at the end of last year, data fraud and theft and cyber attacks is still within the top 10 likelihood of threats. And if you look at what sort of sit around that from a risk perspective, extreme weather events, climate action failure, natural disasters, those are all types of risks where the likelihood of actually reducing that risk from happening is fairly low. So we should actually start thinking about cyber in the same way as and data theft. It seems that we're starting to lose the battle of actually reducing the likelihood of that risk actually eventuate. So we need to start thinking about, and this is what some of those other risks are been looked at, is how do we address them by managing the impact of that risk happening. So first thing I want to talk through is just basically how the sources of cyber incidents have changed over the last 4 years. Cyber criminal activity is still the #1 threat. And what we're showing here is percentages. So although it's showing a drop in the number of cyber criminal and organized crime, it's actually a result of an increase in some other areas. And most notably, there's a steady increase in foreign government and nation-state interference in organizations. We're also seeing a steady increase in third-party risks or issues related with third-party incidents, as well as former employees and suppliers. What we've got presented here is basically a question where we sort of explored what incidents organizations have experienced in the previous year, what the concerns are in the coming year. So the graph that we've got here on the left-hand side, the blue bars, basically showing what incidents were experienced last year when we ran the survey. And we plotted a graph or the line in yellow there showing the same question we asked the year before, basically asking, what are your concerns in the coming year? And what we can see is there's really a mismatch between the concerns around phishing. So organizations experience a lot more phishing attacks than what they expected to experience. And likewise, there was a lot more concern around data breach and third-party supplier risks, loss of data, data theft, and unauthorized access. And really, my sort of takeaway from that is that I don't think organizations really have an appreciation and understanding on how good the security is actually of those trusted individuals or trusted organizations.
So we've actually got our own statistics that we run separate to the BDO and AusCERT cybersecurity survey. And these, of course, are from our members, which are in Australia and some surrounding nations. Now, the interesting thing is it correlates. So guess what? Phishing is right at the top. Now that's by volume. Of course, we have incidents that are suffered by members that are far higher impact, but in a far less volume. So focusing though on phishing, it's interesting to see that if you look at our statistics, just ignore for a moment the fact that in 2016 it sort of dips down into 2017 again. That was actually due to a change in the way that we do our own reporting, so it became far more accurate. But you can still see that the trend is up, up, up and up. So we've been collecting this data for a very long time, and it correlates directly with what we're seeing in the BDO survey. I've personally seen this change from pure financial gain to more targeted attacks like business email compromise, and we've seen it spin on to other areas like universities, where the target, of course, is intellectual property research. And obviously there's been a bit of a shift in that community to counter the threat. We've seen some interesting changes in the technology behind defences for phishing as well. For example, we're now electronically connected with a lot of our members, and we're able to send out notifications or indicators of compromise to allow them to defend themselves against it. We've also got some very interesting in-house phishing tracking tools that can capture artifacts very rapidly. One of our own senior analysts actually designed that system that we're using internally. It's called Osprey, and that's the subject of another whole presentation. I'll hand back to you, Leon.
Thank you, Mike. So what we want to do now is just look at the 2020 cybersecurity strategy that got released a couple of weeks back. So there was a number of consultation sessions with industry, and what I've just put down some of the takeaways in some of the sessions that we attended on the challenges that those that sort of participated in the workshops was really around clarification on the roles and responsibilities around cybersecurity, especially what's the responsibility of industry, what's the responsibility of government. I think there was a lot of discussions around that small businesses are particularly vulnerable. There was a lot of discussion about how can industry and government really sort of partner together and strengthen those relationships, because cybersecurity is a team sport. If we all go at it alone, we're not going to be successful. There was discussions about how do we get more standards and regulation in place, just to sort of help inform getting some of the basics right. Human behavior or awareness training, that was a problem that was highlighted and needed some guidance in the strategy to address that. There was an acknowledgement that a lot of threats can actually be addressed at scale. So discussions about service providers, how can they actually block some malicious activity at the source rather than you sort of get through the gate. Communication sort of ties back to the roles and responsibilities. Wanted to get some clarity on if threats are identified, making sure that we actually shared in both directions. And then I think the last thing that there was a lot of discussion about is how does we as industry actually prepare to actually respond to a national security incident. So effectively what was put together is a strategy that sort of covered a number of themes across what government action is going to be, what business needs to be responsible for, and the community at large. And I'll sort of go through this in a bit more detail and show how the strategy actually aligns to that.
So AusCERT also analysed the Australian government strategy, and we actually wrote a little blog piece on it, which effectively distills the 60 points and some 50 pages worth of information down to 5 key things. And you can see them on the slide here in front of us. We did that because we obviously believe very strongly in this, but we also wanted to make this as simple as possible for our members to sort of understand, well, where do they fit in? Now, it's important to note we're not the be all and end all. Vendors aren't the be all and end all. This is one step towards a nation that's coming together to achieve cybersecurity resilience. And the reason you might want to have a little read of our blog is it's a very short way to sort of understand, well, here's what I can do in my organisation towards that goal. We've been obviously contributing in terms of things like deterrence for a very long time. We've got roots going back some 27 years as a cyber emergency response team. But what we've seen in recent years, certainly the time that I've been here at AusCERT, we've seen a real shift in focus from our members, expecting much more on the prevention and detection side of things. And of course, that's where threat intelligence comes in, and it's certainly where we focused a lot of our energies. If you're looking at things that you can do in your organisations, obviously resilience is the key here. And just looking at us, we belong to a couple of forums like the Asia Pacific CERT teams. We also belong to FIRST, the Forum of Incident Response and Security Teams. They're not exclusive. You can belong to organisations like that. You can visit your own JCSC or your local ASA branch to actually participate in some of those forums. So if you do that, great. If you invest in cybersecurity, even better. We're investing what very small surplus we have, being a not-for-profit organisation, obviously. What small surplus we have will go back into team training. So that's how we provide an investment to cybersecurity here. Thanks, Leon.
Thank you, Mike. So what we wanted to do now is to actually see, given the new revised cybersecurity strategy, what's our statistics from the survey actually saying about what's happening in industry, and how prepared are we to sort of respond to the increased threat landscape? So to take a step back, I think for a good security strategy, and this is not analysing the 2020 government strategy that got released, this is more about the organisation that wants to put in place a capability to ensure that they have got a strong security function, or they're able to be resilient to manage the threat environment. Really, there's four main areas that I think organisations need to look at. I think the first one is around getting strong leadership. And that means that you need to build a security capability that has got the right security objectives, which really is based on making sure that it aligns to business objectives. Because at the end of the day, if the security capability is not supporting the business, you're not going to achieve the right outcome. So really making sure you've got that strong leadership in place. The next thing is around making sure that there's a good understanding and a thorough understanding on the threat environment. So it's really about preparing and understanding what are the threats and risks that's related to the organization. Once that's understood, it's about making sure that the right protection is putting in place to sort of manage and protect those critical information assets that the organization operate. Now, because of the inherent risk and the complexity of the cyber landscape that's changing, I mean, referring back to the World Economic Forum slide that I showed before, it's starting to get quite difficult to manage the likelihood that you're going to be suffering a cyber attack. So really, it's about, the last thing is to be prepared that if a cyber incident or event actually eventuate, that we do have the right defense mechanisms in place to be able to respond to that. So really, for me, in a nutshell, there's four key things that needs to be in place to establish a good security capability. So what I'll do now is actually, for all four of those, sort of analyze how the 2020 cybersecurity strategy is supporting organizations to be able to sort of achieve that a better and a stronger security capability. So the first one is, as I said, it's about setting direction. And if you look at some of the things coming out of the 2020 strategy, some of the actions that government is sort of going to undertake is to strengthen those partnerships that we talked about. So really, it's about setting a direction and providing some leadership and guidance on what good looks like, and also support around establishing and enhancing security capabilities. if you look at what businesses need to do to be able to set that direction, I think one of the things coming out there is the uplift of cybersecurity capability in small to medium-sized enterprises, as well as also businesses need to be able to grow a skilled workforce. And if you look at what the community can do from a direction perspective, is about getting access and apply guidance to good information security. And then also have the ability to get help and support when needed. So if we look at the results that from our survey, the main 4 areas, which is about direction, is 4 things that we sort of looked at is what sort of risk reporting and communications is provided on a regular basis to the boards and executives, whether there's a chief or someone responsible at a senior level for security, which is your CISO, policies in place, and then awareness training. And what we've seen is over the last number of years, there's been an increase in that, but it's interesting to see that still less than 60% of, or just over 60% of organizations, the management of boards getting regular updates on cybersecurity. Not many organizations have got a chief or a senior person responsible for security. So latest survey results are showing that it's less than 40%. Policy is about making sure there's clear guidance on what goods look like. And from the survey results, only 80% of organizations typically would have that in place. And there's just less than 80% really is investing in education and training. So really from a direction perspective, there's some work that still organizations need to do. It's really about, I think, owners need to take more responsibility in setting a direction of where security needs to go. So what we've looked at is to say, for those organizations that actually have got a close alignment with their security capability to business objectives, so it's really where management is really involved in that. We see that there's a lot more confidence in those organizations in their ability to actually meet the changing threat landscape. And that really signal and shows that there's the right alignment, and those organizations know which areas they need to invest to strengthen their environment.
So in terms of providing that level of leadership at different levels of your organisation, we actually talk to a lot of our members about how they fit into the greater piece of the puzzle of cybersecurity in their organisation. We've obviously seen in recent years a big shift in senior management, C-levels, taking an active interest in cybersecurity. Now, obviously, their portfolio is huge and they're not interested in detailed analysis, but what they are interested in is timely and relevant information. Now, there's obviously a lot of media coverage these days of cybersecurity, and that's not where your senior manager wants to find out that, well, they've had a breach in their own organisation, or that there is some new vulnerability out that might affect their organisation. So their expectation, obviously, is that that information is available from you if you're, a mid-level manager or an analyst in their organisation. In order to do that better, most mid-level managers then have to sort of look at, well, I need to have a copy and paste ready to go from some trusted authority, and in many cases with our members, obviously that's us, where we actually provide at least enough information that they can effectively copy paste and send that to their senior management to make them aware of the threats that are being faced. Now, I've actually had a couple of CIOs say to me, if you only read one thing, you read AusCERT's ADIR, the Daily Intelligence Report, or you read ACE's News Roundup or something like that. Those sorts of communications are obviously exceedingly important to bridge that gap between all these levels. If you go, to the level of the people that are actually on the tools, they don't want to have to do any research. They haven't got time. And this is what all our members are telling us. I just want something that it's in its final form, so I don't have to reanalyze it or recontextualize it. I want something that's relevant to me that I can then hopefully plug electronically into some platform or existing system that will just ingest it and do its thing. Interestingly though, we've seen probably in recent times, a real shift in what I would call the soft skills, I suppose. So some areas like human resources or project management or those sorts of areas that aren't as technical as cybersecurity or pure IT are taking an interest in learning the basics of cybersecurity so that they have that level of awareness across the entire organisation. Thanks, Leon.
Thank you, Mike. So next thing we want to look at is if organisations really understand what's at risk. So if you look at the strategy and what sort of guidance and direction is going to be provided there, from a government perspective, it is providing support to businesses to meet baseline cybersecurity standards. The business responsibilities highlighted in the strategy is around how does organisations improve baseline security of critical infrastructure. And then the community itself, it is getting guidance on information security, ensuring they make informed purchasing decisions in buying products that's of better security quality. Now, looking at the survey results and what we're seeing there from an understanding of risk, and what we sort of analysed here is really around the level of IT or cybersecurity standards and policies in place for third-party providers, having baseline security standards in place, doing regular risk assessments, analysing third parties, etc. And what we can see here is, on average, it's fairly lower maturity than what we were hoping for. On the average of 60% of organisations have got those baseline standards in place to say, this is really what good look like, and also then actually following up. I mean, for me, cloud security standards, there's a whole heap of those you can sort of adopt off the internet, and the same for third-party vendors. So really, I think there's a bit more work to be done around setting those baseline standards, and to see initiatives in the strategy to say government's going to get involved to define what those standards are is really a good outcome. So if you look at those organisations that actually has defined a baseline risk requirement or risk standards and doing regular risk assessments, the impact of a cybersecurity incident is significantly reduced compared to those that actually do not have those baseline standards in place. And just some of the stats we're seeing there is that those with not that in place actually experiencing double or twice the amount of ransomware, business email compromise for those organizations who do not have that risk visibility. And that's really a threat we're starting to see coming through. So really, I think if organizations putting the effort in to understand and define what goods look like, I think a lot of threats would be addressed and understood in a much easier way.
And indeed, we've certainly seen across our members, we've seen it becoming a relatively normal business function now that, you know, cybersecurity risk is just woven into all processes. There's one or two I'd like to call out in particular where we've seen this done very well. We'll talk first of all about our own sector, the higher education sector. For those that don't know, AusCERT actually sits within one of the universities, UQ. And also for those that don't know, there is an umbrella organisation called CAUDIT, the Council of Australian Directors of IT, which is funded by the sector across all the universities. And for years, they've done things like group procurement for IT, coordinated professional development, that sort of stuff. But obviously, they've realised recently that cybersecurity is important, and they've effectively set up a branch within CAUDIT to handle that. We obviously play a very big part of that, considering who we are. But what we've seen actually is they're now looking at the elements that we can't do or shouldn't do, things like risk assessments across the sector for vendors that are common to all universities. So actually pooling those resources, instead of 40 odd universities doing a risk assessment of Blackboard, the system they use for classes online, maybe just do that once and share it across the entire sector. So we're seeing that done extremely well, certainly within the university sector. But another one I'd call out is in the state government sector. I'll mention Victoria because I think they need all the love they can get at the moment, considering what's going on. But other state governments are doing this as well. And they've actually taken the approach that no, risk management is something the government is putting their hand up, the state government's putting their hands up to do. And if you are a local council or a statutory body or a state government department, you know, we're here to help in a collective way. So that's certainly a change that we've seen recently that we think is for the positive. Not dwelling on negative, but there are still a couple of industries that see cybersecurity either as a competitive advantage or one that isn't meant to be shared. And you know, that really doesn't help anyone. So if you're in such an industry and you want to start some kind of collaboration or effort, maybe just pop into your local JCSC or something and see what you can start. Thanks, Leon.
Thank you, Mike. So what we want to look at now is what sort of activities and strategies been proposed to put in place to actually reduce the likelihood of that risk eventuate. And there's a lot of activities put in the strategy forward. So from a government perspective, it's about protecting critical infrastructure and essential services, again, strengthening those cybersecurity partnerships, support business to meet those cybersecurity standards, enhance capabilities. From a business perspective, a whole heap of activities. Again, it's about improving those baseline security capabilities, uplift security of SMEs, provide secure products and services, take activity to sort of block malicious activity at scale. And then from a community perspective, similarly standing out there is making informed purchase decisions. So if we look at the survey results and what we're seeing from that is, if you look at some of the controls that's been put in place to manage the likelihood of a risk, what's interesting is to see those big sort of peaks around antivirus and email, which shows that there's still a high reliance on sort of blocking malware or putting secure email in place. But that's not really working because phishing email and malware is still seen as the highest threat identified coming through. That graph that I showed about where the concerns are coming from organizations, which relates to unauthorized access to systems, loss of data. If you look at those sort of controls around privileged account management, data loss prevention, IDS, prevention systems, fairly low maturity compared to the rest. So on average, sort of between 50 and 60% maturity, which shows that there's still room for improvement to really strengthen those controls. So if you look at, again, organizations that are fairly confident in meeting their security capability, are really those that have spent a lot of time focusing on understanding their risk. And really, it shows that investing in understanding what your risks are, putting the right controls in place, do make organizations feel more confident that they actually ready to sort of respond to the latest threats.
So one of the things that you can do in your organization, obviously, is bi-directional threat sharing with others. Now, that doesn't have to be necessarily the government or a vendor or anyone in particular. It might simply be within your sector. There's a couple of good examples of that already occurring in this country. The banks, for example, have been doing it now for a good 15 years or more. Not all sectors do it. I talked a bit earlier in this presentation about CAUDIT, which is the Council of Australian Directors of IT, and how they have established a separate capability for cybersecurity for the sector. One of the ways that we contributed very significantly in that was actually building an ISAC, an Information Sharing and Analysis Centre. Now, we did it. Others have done it. It can be done in any sector. The way we did it, if anyone's interested in how you actually go about it, ask others. There's a wonderful organisation over in the United States in Indiana University called the REN ISAC, the Research and Education Network ISAC. And we just spent a bit of time with them, and they were very willing to teach. And the biggest piece of advice they actually gave us was, don't try to boil the ocean, just choose one thing that you can do and do well, and then share that within the sector, and then you'll increase the cybersecurity resilience just by doing that. So the way we chose to do that was sharing indicators of compromise in a closed community. And we're using Circle's platform, MISP, Malware Information Sharing Platform. Circle is the Luxembourg Computer Emergency Response Team. It's open source, anyone can use it. There's a lot of people that are experienced now in using it. And that is one way that you can, in your organisation, you can contribute bilaterally with other organisations and share threats in order to reduce those risks that you face. This is certainly one of the things that we're very proud of. I think it would be great to see some support from particularly the government to do this in some other sectors as well. Thanks, Leon.
So the last area we want to look at is really about understanding what sort of activities has been proposed around incident resilience. So it's about the ability to respond and recover from that. And that's really looking at reducing the risk impact. And if you look at some of the activities that the strategy is proposing to look at, is a nice segue into what Mike was just talking about. There's the share of threat information. Again, it's strengthening those cybersecurity partnerships and enhance the security capabilities. Similar for business, improve baseline security by using that threat information to support where to do your investment in your security controls. And then also it's about understanding where the threats are coming from. You can then sort of block those malicious activity at scale. And then from a community perspective, I think that the one that's coming in there is about reporting cybercrime. So if you look at the survey results and specific areas that sort of resonate with this, is around having incident response plans in place, having the technology in place to sort of detect incidents, which is a SIEM and a security operations center, and then have the capability to sort of respond to that, your incident response capability. And if you look at overall, those are still at a fairly low maturity. Incident response plans have made significant improvements over the last sort of 4 years. And I think the main reasons for that is the mandatory data breach notification requirements from the privacy legislation required that organizations actually have processes in place to report data breaches. So that's why we've seen an increase there. I think for me, the interesting part is business continuity and disaster recovery. Those activities that's been around for decades, and still what we see there is fairly low maturity. And if you look at some of the ransomware impact, to sort of reduce the impact of that is to have a good and an operational BCP or disaster recovery plan in place. We're still seeing a fairly low maturity level of those, less than 80%. Means that organizations need to spend more time on investing in that. Sort of just to lead into what Mike was talking about, that threat intelligence capability. So what we've seen is those organizations that actually have got more mature capability in place around threat intelligence are actually detecting incidents earlier, and actually make them more resilient and capable to respond to that. So across the board, we've seen those with actually threat intelligence capability are able to detect those cyber events before it actually becomes an incident that needs to be dealt with.
Indeed, although the sheer volume of incidents that a lot of our members are facing is really the challenge here. And I suppose someone should make a conference about this. You know, you need some kind of super action hero or something to come flying in and save the day, because it's just so overwhelming. I'll use an example of the indicators of vulnerability and indicators of compromise that we send out to our members on a daily basis. The scale of it is so big that, you know, we have to use a logarithmic scale on the graph, because some of the vulnerabilities are so big, some are not as big. But it's just interesting to see that there is literally, you know, hundreds of thousands of these going out to our members. Now, our members, you can see there on the graph, our members do cover a very large section of Australia, but it's not all of Australia. So if you're in a position where you're, you know, defending your organisation, you're obviously faced with a massive volume. So how do you actually break that down and bring it to something a little more manageable? Obviously, a risk-based approach, and that's what Leon's been talking about all the way through here. But look at some of the statistics here. We're saying that, you know, phishing is one of the top incidents, and sure, there can be some significant impacts from phishing. But one of the smallest incident numbers that we deal with are things like actual compromises. So compared to hundreds of thousands of, say, vulnerable services in an indicator of compromise data feed, there might be hundreds of investigations that we're actually doing into a real compromised host. So that tells me one of two things: either people are very quickly remediating the problems, or there are a lot of problems that aren't actually being addressed. So the advice would be take a risk-based approach to the incidents that your organisation's facing, and use what intelligence there is out there. And it's not just us, of course. I'm just using examples from our statistics. There's plenty of other ways that you can find out what your organisation is facing. Ask someone for help and you'll certainly find it. And that is all from me. Thank you, Leon.
Thank you, Mike. I think that sort of concludes our presentation. So thank you for your time, and we'll be taking some questions now.
Unfortunately, we're well past time. I'd like to thank Mike and Leon for presenting the survey results and some discussion in the chat. As you possibly saw, hopefully, there's the link to the slides in the chat, as well as a link to where to go and download the BDO AusCERT survey yourself directly. And just a quick reminder, after lunch, starting at 12:50, the next session here is by John Peter Hayward, Cyber Exposure and Risk Mitigation, a regional bank perspective, followed by Simon Starn talking about architecture, governance and security. If you don't have much time for lunch, do like I am, grab a coffee and a Tim Tam, or hopefully you've got time to go and make lunch. Anyway, see you back here in 20 minutes or so.